instead of becoming more like the crusty, hardened, like this is the only thing a man can be, they find the reality of manhood within themselves with the help of something that they have idealized their entire lives.
What others might deem stupid shit, matters. It's worth talking and thinking about, and so do we. We're sisters Tracie and Emily, collectively known as the Guy Girls. Every week, we take turns rewatching, researching, and reconsidering beloved media and sharing what we learn. Come overthink with us, and if you get value from the show, please consider supporting us. You can become a patron on Patreon or send us a one-time tip through Ko-fi. Both links are in the show notes. And thanks.
I'm Emily Guy Birkin, and you're listening to Deep Thoughts About Stupid Shit. Because pop culture is still culture, and shouldn't you know what's in your head? On today's episode, I will be sharing my deep thoughts about the 1991 film City Slickers with my sister, Tracie Guy Decker, and with you. Let's dive in. So, Trace, I know you've seen it. We saw it together the very first time. But tell me what you remember about City Slickers, what it brings up for you.
So, as you know, I think this was the first film that we did the Father's Day movie theater trip with Dad, which then became a tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So it holds a special place in my heart. What I remember is the three guys, only Billy Crystal. Billy Crystal is the only name I could come up with in terms of the actors. Mm-hmm. But I remember them going to the Dude Ranch and like getting in touch with their feelings, and finding their smile again. Mm-hmm. I remember the cow giving birth and Billy Crystal having to help and bringing home the calf named mm-hmm. Norman, mm-hmm. And losing his watch inside the cow. I remember that the other, one of the friends was like married to a woman who I think we would describe as ball busting today, probably then as well. And he was sleeping with a girl at the grocery store where he worked, mm-hmm. which her father owned.
Mm-hmm. The wife's father, not the checkout.
Right.
Girl's
right.
father.
The wife's father, not the girlfriend's father. And I remember like it gave me the warm fuzzies mm-hmm. at the time. And mm-hmm. like it made Dad happy, which also made me happy. That's about it. That's mm-hmm. what I got. Mm-hmm. That's what I got for it. So I kind of know why we're talking about it since it has that same moment for mm-hmm. you too, mm-hmm. as the first Father's Day movie outing, but I'm sure there's more to it. Tell mm-hmm. me, what's at stake here? Why is City Slickers important? And what do you think we're going to talk about?
So, as you said, this was the very first of what became a tradition. And actually, I don't remember any of the movies in the middle. I remember that one, taking Dad to see that, you and me together. And then I remember the last one I did, which was Despicable Me. That would have been about 2008, I think, 2009, somewhere around there. And there were several in the years in between, but I couldn't tell you what movies they were.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. It tickled Dad so completely.
Yeah, he really liked it.
Because it married so many of the things that he really loved. So he loved Westerns. He loved adventure stories. He loved comedy. I think it's fair to say he loved Billy Crystal.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I think he also really liked Chosen Family kind of stories.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And he loved... Well, he was a nurturer. Dad really loved little children. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize until I was like about my kids' age. They're about 11 and 14 right now. That it was unusual for your dad to wave at babies. And I can remember Dad got into gardening right around when you went to college and a little bit, and like definitely when I went to college. And I remember he said something like, I like having something to take care of. And so the subplot of Billy Crystal's character, Mitch, with Norman the Calf, really, I'm sure, would have appealed to him, even though I doubt that, like, I mean, he may have been able to articulate it, but he wouldn't have to us. And so this film I associate so strongly with Dad that I got teary-eyed watching it last night. And thinking about how the movie looked to Dad, who was 41 when it came out, and it was about men about his age having a midlife crisis. So, and if you're watching the video, you'll see I'm getting a little red-faced because this does make me...
And listeners, our dad has been gone since 2013.
Yeah. But I want to examine what this film really means, what story it's telling, because I think that it actually has a lot of lessons that are still really useful in 2024. Although I think there are a lot of things that it would not do if it were made in 2024. And there were several things that made me feel a little left out as a woman watching it. But the way it explores masculinity and what manliness means, I think is really nuanced for something from the early 90s. And I think that speaks to why Dad liked it. Like, Dad was a movie buff, but he did not go see, like, Rambo. Like, he might have seen the first one when it was actually a nuanced view of what it means to be a Vietnam veteran. But once it just became mowing people down, wasn't interested. So in a lot of ways, our dad rejected the toxic masculinity that required men to be a certain way. And that's one of the things that I miss about him, and miss because I have two sons, having him show an example of what it is like to be masculine and nurturing. So that's something I want to talk about. But I think it's also important to talk about privilege, and a lot of privilege that we see in this film that kind of goes unexamined. I do want to talk about heterosexual relationships between men and women, and what they mean, and how they are treated in this film that in a lot of ways has such a positive view of many different ways of being masculine, but there is still an underlying women as prizes kind of sense to it. So it's remarkably funny. I mean, I knew it was funny. And like, some of the things that were funny when I was a kid weren't funny anymore, but I laughed out loud multiple times last night, like with surprise, because they were lines I'd forgotten, even though I've seen this movie many times.
Cool. All right. Well, remind me, what is the plot of City Slickers?
So we meet three lifelong best friends: Mitch, played by Billy Crystal; Ed, played by Bruno Kirby, he's the one with the mustache; and Phil, played by Daniel Stern. Now, Stern did the voiceover for The Wonder Years. Right. So that is who he will always be. He's Kevin Arnold all grown up to me. They're lifelong best friends. They're all approaching 40. And Ed is like Mr. Machismo and is always like chasing these like life-affirming, youthful type of experiences. Like, they are running with the bulls in Pamplona when we first meet them.
He's the mustachioed one, yeah?
Yes, yeah, he's the one with the mustache. Mitch is happily married to Barbara. Phil is very unhappily married to Arlene, to the point where he pretends to be asleep so he doesn't have to talk to her. And Ed, even though he's in his late 30s, keeps dating younger and younger women, where at one point Mitch makes the joke, like, soon he's going to be bringing home sperm to date. So a year after they run with the bulls in Pamplona, It is Mitch's 39th birthday. His mother calls and goes through this litany at 5:15 a.m. because that's exactly what time he was born. And he like recites it along with her. I found out that that is actually autobiographical for Billy Crystal. His mother would do that exact thing, and he was born at 5 in the morning. And so it's basically word for word the story she would tell him every year on his birthday.
That is hilarious.
It's so cute. He and his wife are chatting after the phone call, and his wife is basically saying like, I'm just going to cancel your birthday party because like you always get depressed around your birthday. Like, and he's like, no, I want to see my friends. And she's like, okay, but can you just not be so negative? He goes to work and gets gently yelled at by his boss. He sells advertising for a radio station. He also goes to his son's, I think, 4th grade classroom for career day. His son is played by Jake Gyllenhaal in his film debut.
Oh, weird.
I know. So he goes to that. When his son introduces him, he says, my dad's a submarine commander. And he's like, oh, Danny. And he's like, okay, he works for WBSM or whatever it is. And so he ends up having a bit of a nervous breakdown in front of the children where he's like, it all goes by so fast. Your 20s go by, and then all of a sudden it's your 30s, you're raising kids, and you're like, where did my 20s go? And like he goes through this whole thing through to your 80s. And the teacher is just, meanwhile, like, no. They go home to the birthday party, and he's like ruminating on death. And his wife is saying like, he says he feels trapped, which his wife takes pretty hard
Personally.
Yeah.
Can't blame her.
Yeah. So the party starts, and Phil and Ed give Mitch his present, which is they had saved up for another one of their adventure trips where it's going to be cattle rustling. They're going to be cowboys for 2 weeks. They learn how to do everything, and they help herd the cattle from a ranch in New Mexico to a ranch in Colorado. And Mitch says, I'm sorry, I can't go. We're going to visit Barbara's parents in Florida. I can't do it. And in the middle of the party, that's when Phil's affair partner shows up, played by Yeardley Smith, who does Bart Simpson's voice.
Bart Simpson.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So it's Bart Simpson saying, I'm late. And there's a point where Arlene, the wife, says, like, you've been having an affair with this teenager? And or this child or something like that. She's a teenager, I think. She's like, I'm not a teenager. I'm 20. And for some reason, that is really funny.
Yeah. There's another, like, you had sex with her in my father's store. And she's like, no, in his car.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. So, screaming fight. The moment that made me laugh so hard because Arlene and Phil are yelling at each other, I hate you, in front of like all of everyone's friends. And Arlene like runs into the bedroom of Mitch's apartment to call her father. And he's like, yeah, well, I hate you more. If hate were people, I'd beat China.
Why is that funny? That's really funny.
It's so funny. So they're cleaning up after the party, and Barbara tells Mitch, I don't want you to come with us to Florida. I need you to go on this trip with your friends. Phil needs you to go on this trip. And like, you told me you feel trapped, that I make you feel trapped. He's like, no, I didn't mean you. And she's like, you need to go, and you need to come back with your head on straight, basically. I need you to find your smile, is what she said. So they go to the ranch. We meet a cast of various people. There's Ira and Barry, who are Ben and Jerry, like the ice cream folks. We've got those two. We've got a father and son dentists from Baltimore named Ben and Steve. They're black.
They're black.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember them.
And I always really liked Ben.
He's the son, right?
Ben's the father. The son is Steve, yeah. Like, why do I know that guy? He played the police officer in Clue. And that actor has this gorgeous voice. And that, like, I think that's what it was. And then...
A woman, right?
Yeah, a woman
blonde?
named Bonnie shows up. She says, I feel so out of place. My friend was supposed to come with me, and I didn't find out until I was at the airport that she's not coming. And I feel like I don't belong here. And all of the men, because she's an attractive
Gorgeous.
woman, are like, no, you belong. So there are two cattle hands, ranch hands, I don't know, cowboys going, TR and Jeff. And they are very typical toxic masculinity sort of thing. The first time we really meet them, they're practicing roping, and Bonnie is off practicing by herself. And they come over and they offer to help her, and she says, "No, thanks, I'm good." And they're like, "No, you really want us to help you?" And Mitch and his friends are talking, and Mitch says, like, "We need to do something about this." And Ed, who's the one with the mustache, says, like, "I'll take care of it." He's like, no, you're going to cause a fight. I will take care of it. And so Mitch comes over and does really good, like, bystander intervention. Like, he comes over, he makes jokes. He says to Bonnie, like, "We'd love for you to come practice with us over there. I need all the help I can get. You look like you're doing well," and all of that. And, like, under normal circumstances, that would have diffuse the situation for many people. But these two guys are awful. And so they continue to escalate and, like, kind of grab at Bonnie. And along comes Jack Palance's Curly, who the way Billy Crystal describes him as, like, he's so leathery, he's like a saddlebag with eyes. And he is kind of representative of, like, old school John Wayne masculinity.
Sort of chivalrous?
Chivalrous, yeah. So he comes in and he ropes, I couldn't remember which one's Jeff, which one's TR, but the one that was being more egregious, he ropes him around the neck and pulls him backwards against the fence. And then Mitch says, like, no, we were taking care of it. And Curly ends up kind of, like, embarrassing him. The cowboy refuses. He says to the cowboy, Curly says, like, "You owe this woman an apology." And he's like, "I'm not going to give him one." And so he throws a knife in between the guy's legs. And so he's like, "I'm sorry, ma'am, it will never happen again." And that's our introduction to Curly. Bonnie actually says to Mitch, "That was very brave of you. I really appreciate it." And he goes, "I'm married," and runs. So that evening, like, they're talking. It's the night before they leave. And Curly is the head of the cattle drive. So, like, he's going to be in charge. The cattle boss, the drive boss, I don't know what he's called. And Mitch is expressing some concern because he's like, that guy is, like, so insane. Like, it was so much. And then, like, and he's right behind me, because no comedy is complete without that joke. The next morning they get going. They are, like, figuring it out. They're learning stuff. They're still very much city slickers, as Curly calls them. Oh, and Curly has the best line of all when like, Mitch realizes he's behind him and says, like, "Look, I think we got off on the wrong foot, and, you know, I was just trying to make some jokes, but, you know, I'd really like this to be a good experience." And Curly says to him, "I crap bigger than you." That also, I imagine, really tickled Dad.
Yeah, I seem to remember him liking that.
So off they go. They're greenhorns. They don't really know what they're doing. There comes a point where Phil and Ed get into a fight because Ed is now married to the 24-year-old he'd been dating.
Oh.
And he's like, "I'm worried because I don't want to cheat on her." And Phil says to him, "So don't." And Ed says, like, "That's awfully smug coming from you, considering you cheated on Arlene."
Oh.
So big fight. Mitch tries to mitigate things, and it only stops when Curly throws water on them. The next morning, Mitch kind of brokers peace between the two friends. And he says, look, I've got something so that, like, to celebrate. Just because we're out in the wilderness doesn't mean we have to live like it. I brought in a battery-operated coffee grinder so we can have fresh, like, French roast coffee, which spooks the cattle. And there's a stampede.
Right. I seem to remember that, yeah.
And so they managed to gather everyone up, but there's some portion of the herd that went off into like an arroyo or something. So Curly says, well, I'm going to go get them and Mitch is coming with me. And like he says things that are like kind of slightly ominous. He's like, so he tells the two cowboys, like, I'll catch up with you later. And he's like, you mean we'll catch up with you later? So they end up finding the cattle. It gets to be so late that they need to make camp for the night. Curly is again being kind of threatening towards Mitch, and he says to him, like, look, if you're going to kill me, get on with it. If you're not, shut the hell up. Which kind of endears him to Curly. Even though Mitch is still clearly terrified of him. So they end up kind of bonding a little bit. Mitch is playing the Tumbling Tumbleweed song and Curly sings along to it. And then the next morning they're walking, or they're riding, and talking a little bit about life and about love and things like that. Curly tells him that the secret to life is this, and he holds up a finger, and Mitch goes, your finger? He's like, no, one thing. He's like, okay, that's great. What's the one thing? He's like, that's for you to decide. It's different for everyone. And so immediately after that, they come across the cow giving birth. Norman is breech, and Curly has to hold the cow down because Mitch doesn't know what he's doing. And so if he like is restraining her wrong, it could, like, she could kill him, could kill the calf. I mean, like, because if she's kicking and stuff like that. Another moment that has stuck with me forever is like, you stick your hands in, and so he has both hands in this cow, and he pulls one out, and he like points, is like, this was not in the brochure. And there's like effluvia coming off his finger.
Yeah, I remember that.
And that was actually when I had my first child. I had toured the hospital. And like I knew what the room was going to be, and it was the hospital was one where like you gave birth in the same room where you stayed in, and so like we came in at like midnight, and they took me into a closet with like a blood pressure cuff, and like I mean it was a closet, and I said like, this was not on the hospital tour. And I was like, thank you, Billy Crystal. That's where I got that from. Anyway. The calf is born, and Mitch is just overwhelmed and delighted. But the cow is suffering and dying, and so Curly shoots her to put her out of her misery. They catch up with the rest of the crew, and Mitch is saying, like, Curly's really great. Like, you should get to know him. And he goes over to talk to him and realizes that Curly has died. He had a heart attack and just kind of peacefully died while sitting just outside the camp. So they bury him because they can't carry his body on horseback. And they are now having to rely on the two cowboys who were so awful to Bonnie. The next day, one character I haven't mentioned is Cookie, the cook. Who apparently has a bit of an alcohol problem, and he's got a caravan. He's not just on horseback because he's got all the food and the supplies, and he is drinking too much and is like riding around in circles until the point where the horses are bolting towards a ravine. And Cookie jumps off at the last minute, but the horses go over, and they have to bury the horses, which like really bothered me. Those poor horses. So the two cowboys, so Cookie broke both his legs. And so the two cowboys are like, we have to get him to a place where he can get doctor's care. We need someone to volunteer to carry him to a town. I'll draw you a map. It's within like a half a day's ride. It's not that far, but we can't leave the herd. And so Ben volunteers himself and his son, Steve, because we have some medical training. He's like, Dad, we're dentists. He's like, yes, but we're going to be in a better position to help him if he needs it than anyone else. And like, there's this lovely like father-son moment where he's like, Dad, like, aren't you having fun? He's like, this will be fun because we'll do it together. So, and someone's cutting onions in here again. Anyway, unfortunately, without the restraining influence of Curly or anyone else, the two cowboys find Cookie's alcohol stash. They get drunk and they are being really terrifying. They're throwing bottles in the air and shooting them. And then they grab Norman the calf and like put a gun to this poor little baby calf to get Mitch to come out. So he does. He again tries to diffuse the situation with humor, and like he's very good at it. It's just that these are not people who are willing to abide by typical social standards. So there ends up being a fist fight and scuffle, and there's guns involved, and Phil, the one who's married to the woman who he hates, manages to get one of the guns and point it in the face of one of the cowboys. And so, like, everything is calmed down a little bit. They're like, go sleep it off to the cowboys. And, like, Mitch and Ed went to go check on Phil, make sure he's okay. We then find out that the cowboys desert them. Because he's like, well, because they knew we were going to get them in trouble. It's like, well, we were. At this point, it's the three friends, Bonnie, Ira, and Barry, are left. And so they're like, well, do we know where we're going? Like, well, I think we're going this way. Well, like, how are we going to get the herd there? And Ira and Barry are saying, like, we have
Screw the herd.
Yeah, we have to abandon them. Like, this is survival. And so Ed says, I'm going to herd the cattle. And Mitch is like, that's insane. You can't do that. You don't know what you're doing. And Phil says, I'm going to do it too. And it looks like Mitch is not going to. He's going to go with Ira, Barry, and Bonnie. But the next day, as Phil and Ed are struggling with the herd, Mitch comes back, and now wearing Curly's hat. So, like, he had been wearing his baseball cap the entire time, but now he's like, you know what? I'm doing this. They have a number of like close calls where they are struggling. It starts raining really hard. They need to cross a river. They successfully cross the river with the herd. But as they're leaving, Mitch hears Norman crying because he's not tall enough to be able to walk across the river. So Mitch has always been really bad at roping, and in the heat of the moment, he's able to rope Norman, but because of the weather, he is pulled off his horse and into the river with Norman. And so Phil and Ed are able to rescue him. And it's a very, I mean, like, watching it now, I was kind of impressed with how much of an action scene it was for comedians. Now, granted, I'm sure it was stunt doubles. You know, you can't. Nothing's close enough that you can see anything. But still, it was an intense scene. They return back they finally get to the ranch where they meet all of the other vacationers. So Ben and Steve are there, Cookie is there, Bonnie, Ira, and Barry are there. And like they come home triumphant. They then learn that the business model of this ranch is they just herd the cattle back and forth. You know, they sell like spots for people to learn how to do this. And the owner says, like, I'm going to refund all your money. And Steve says, well, actually, instead of a refund, could my dad and I just come back for the next one when we herd him back to New Mexico? Because I really want to spend time with my dad doing this. This was fun. And that's when we learned that the cattle are all off to be slaughtered because he got an offer from a meat company that he couldn't refuse, which leaves Mitch going like, they trusted us. And I was like, oh, I wonder how this would hit my vegan sister now. Especially especially since you spend so much time seeing how cute these animals are. So
that's why I'm vegan.
I know.
Well, that's why I don't eat beef.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The three friends end up talking. They Ed had said that his wife Kim wants to have a baby, and he's like, but then that's the end of it. That's the end of my being able to do whatever I want with my life. And so like he's uncomfortable with the idea of it. Phil has felt like his life is over, and Mitch has tried to tell him like, no, you're getting a do-over. You can do over your life. You know, and Phil's like, but it's too late. I'm almost 40. And of course, Mitch has been feeling like he doesn't have a purpose. And in that last night, they're talking, and Mitch says, I was only thinking of one thing when I was in the river. And you learn that it was his family. Phil says, like, you know what, I'm going to embrace the second chance to have a new life. And Ed says, like, I'm going to stop being scared. I'm going to go home and get Kim pregnant. We see them arrive back home in the airport. Everyone's picked up. Phil gets into a cab with Bonnie. Like, that's how he's starting over, is with an attractive woman. Kim picks up Ed, and Mitch introduces his kids to Norman, who he brought home with him, and they drive off. So that's the not so brief summary. So
where do you want to start?
Let me start with it, because I want to end with the stuff that I like. So let me start with stuff that makes me uncomfortable.
Okay.
The way all of three of these men treat women makes me uncomfortable. Now, Mitch is the best of the three in that, like, he clearly, truly loves his wife. She is the one for him. And there's a point where Ed, like, is talking to Mitch saying, like, you'd never stray. And he's like, no. He's like, well, what if you couldn't get caught? I'm like, see, that's the thing. You'd always get caught. And so, like, Ed comes up with this ridiculous, you know, possibility. Like, what if a alien comes down, like the most beautiful woman on a ship that you've ever seen, and as soon as you're done having sex with her, she goes away, she flies away, never to be back. And Billy Crystal's like, no, I still wouldn't. And he's like, well, why not? He's like, well, because my wife would still know. She'd learn it at the beauty parlor because they know everything there, which is a pretty funny joke. But he's like, I would know. So no, it's not okay. So I appreciated that. And when Mitch is having his crisis, it's not really about his family, although, like, Barbara takes it that way. It's about his work, and he says, like, you get to the point, like, this is the best it's ever going to be, and it's not that great. And I can comprehend that kind of malaise, but it's also, like, a little hard to hear from someone who has the kind of money that he has. Like, he makes it at one point, when, like, Curly is being ominous, he's saying, like, have I shown you pictures of my wife and 2 children? I'm their sole support. So, like, that's the only thing that we know, that Barbara stays at home. But, like, and I know 1991 was a different world financially, but they live in New York City, and they have the money to go to Pamplona, and and it's just like, what do you want, dude? Like, you have these beautiful children. You have this beautiful wife who absolutely adores you. You have 2 lifelong friends who you see regularly. Like, there's a part of me that's just like, oh, come off it, dude. Which makes me feel very sympathetic to Barbara when she's like, you're not coming with us to Florida. And makes me kind of wish she'd been a little more forceful about it. Although he takes it as she doesn't want me around. So that's Mitch. Ed,
but Mitch also, like, he was the one who intervened when Bonnie was being menaced.
Yes.
So, you know, I mean, I think that's worth naming as well, in terms of, like, if we're talking about how these men treat women, like seeing other men behaving badly and intervening,
Mm-hmm.
I think needs to go on the like,
Absolutely.
thank
That
you,
is
good job
definitely on the plus
list.
column. Yeah, yeah. And I think that what the movie is trying to say is that there is a like this sense of like, this isn't the life I thought I was going to be living, that we all experience.
Yeah, I definitely can sympathize with that.
Yeah. And there is, I mean, like, and we're not going to make a movie about people who can't afford to go on the cattle. So that's, but yes, like there's definitely some really great stuff with Mitch. I just kind of wanted to start with him because he has the best of the three. But even him, like when he says, like, no, he wouldn't cheat on Bonnie. It's when they are not Bonnie, excuse me, Barbara. It's when they're admiring Bonnie, and like the camera is showing her riding the horse, like focused on her ass. And that's when Ed is just like, are you telling me you don't want to? And like uses really gross stereotypes. He's like, and Mitch is like, I don't know if I prefer that to the last thing you said, which was bang the shit out of her. So Ed's problematic. His 24-year-old wife is a lingerie model. And he is the instigator of all of these ridiculous, like, youth-affirming vacations trips that they take. He's the one who's like, let's go to Pamplona, let's do this. And so he's like really obsessed with the idea of youth. And he also, there was a point where the three friends are talking about baseball, and Bonnie's like, oh, baseball. And she explains that she used to live with a guy who like talked about baseball all the time. And she's like, I like baseball. It's just the statistics is just not something I care about. Like, I can't say who, played third base for Pittsburgh in 1960, and all three of the men like say the name.
The player.
And so they ask, okay, well, what do you and your friends talk about? She's like, I don't know, like real things, real life, like relationships, like who she's seeing and how it's going, things like that. And Ed says to her, honey, we win. And like Mitch is immediately like, all right, Ed needs to go hibernate again. So like diffusing, but that was gross. It was really gross.
And Mitch called him on it.
He did, yeah. And like Ed does end the film kind of like growing up a bit. We do learn there's a point where the three of them are talking about like, what's the best day of your life and what's the worst day of your life, and you can't say that.
Right, I remember that.
It's very poignant because Ed says the best day of his life was he was 14 years old. His mother caught his father cheating again, not just cheating, but in like brought her to their house in their car, in the family car, and Ed realized that he wasn't just cheating on his mother, he was cheating on the whole family. And so he got in the old man's face and said, like, we don't want you anymore. I will take care of my mother and sister. And like, you need to get out of here. And his father made as if to hit him, and like, he didn't flinch. And so his father left and never came back, and he took care of his sister and mother from that point onward. And so he was saying that was the best day of his life. And like the friends are like, what the hell's the worst? He's like, same day. So like it makes it understandable why someone who at 14 had to take on adult responsibilities is like consistently chasing youth.
Also the toxic masculinity that he needed to use to fight the toxic masculinity of his father.
Yeah. Yeah. So like there's some nuance there. It's the fact that the film ends up treating Bonnie like a prize. Like if there had been, like, it doesn't pass the Bechdel test. I don't think. Actually, no, it does, because Barbara and Kim, Ed's wife, talk about her modeling. So just barely. it's the fact that Bonnie doesn't get to have much to do. She's not much of a person. She's just an attractive single woman who here, we'll hand you over to Phil.
Right.
And that brings me to Phil.
Okay.
So he says the best day of his life was his wedding day.
Yeah, and the worst day was every day since.
Yes. And the film really wants us to believe that Arlene is awful.
Right.
And that Phil is just this beleaguered, sweet guy.
Right, so that we can forgive him for sleeping with the checkout girl.
Yeah. And I wish I knew, like, it's a comedy. It's, 90 minutes long. How are you going to show an unhappy marriage without resorting to tropes? How are you going to show someone having that kind of, like, midlife loss, like the loss of a marriage, without resorting to those tropes? But there is a point where he says, because he has kids, we don't meet them, he has kids, he says, I'm never going to see my wife and kids again. And so it's not just the loss of a marriage. This is like, and when he's like, you know what, I do get a do-over. I'm like, yeah, but what about your kids? I think it's great that you don't feel like, okay, I just need to sit and wait for death because, like, things didn't go the way I wanted to. That's fantastic. But, like, you get to start over with this beautiful blonde woman, and your kids are might not see you, have to stay with their mother who's very angry, which, she has every right to be. And because he worked he was the manager of his father's grocery store, he lost his job too. So, like, that I think is reasonable and acceptable. It's just that the glossing over of his children is upsetting. And then the fact that he ends up with Bonnie when, like, there's no chemistry, there's no spark, we didn't see anything. It's just like, here's a free girl, you get her.
It's lazy. It's lazy writing, honestly.
Yeah.
And it's lazy writing, and it's also like over reliance on that need to partner people,
to pair up,
right?
Yeah,
because honestly,
he could start over without,
and that actually probably would have been better for him.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If we just saw him get into a cab on his own and be like, yeah, I can do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It also, there was a line that I'd completely forgotten. When Mitch goes off with Curly, Ed and Phil are watching and, like, worried for Mitch. And Phil says, oh, God, if anything happens to Mitch, I'm going to take Barbara.
Ew. Yucky.
So, and, like, the timing of it is like, oh, God, if anything happens to Mitch, you expect it to be like, he's my best friend.
Right.
We've been lifelong friends. And so, like, the timing is where the comedy is coming from. And, like, we definitely have the improbably attractive wife thing going on with Barbara and Billy Crystal. But
I don't care because they could have made the same joke with his, like, baseball card collection.
I know.
It didn't have. She's not a fucking possession.
She's a person. Yeah. So,
ew.
Yeah. Like, it makes you wonder, like, so why is Arlene so angry at Phil? Maybe there's a reason why that marriage is so toxic. And, like, we lay it at the feet of this woman because she is shown to be overmade up and shown to, like, be a ball buster. Like, she tells Phil, like, all right, we're leaving the party right now. And he's like, they haven't even cut the cake yet. We haven't given Mitch his present. And she's like, well, you have to open the store at 4:30 in the morning. And he's like, just, can we please stay a little longer? She's like, 15 minutes, not a second more. And, like, and 4:30 is early. It's anyway, there can be some sympathy for Arlene.
I feel like the 4:30 is early is kind of irrelevant. I think what's more relevant is that we don't, like, they've been married for a while. We don't know how many times we don't know what history is there.
Yeah. Has he
Like,
overslept
we don't
through
know
his
how many
alarm?
times he's overslept and not been there on time. And then
Yeah.
she gets yelled at by her dad or whatever. Like, we don't know what else is going on.
Yeah.
That would make her behave in that way. Yeah.
So that's now to compare the three men with Curly, because when Mitch and Curly are riding together, Mitch asks him, "Have you ever been in love?" And Curly says, "One time." And he tells a story of coming up on a farm. There was a young woman was like gardening or working in the dirt, and the sun was going down. And just as he came up over the hill, she stood up to stretch her back, and so the sun shone in a way that, just like he said, showed the figure God gave her, something like that. And like Mitch says, "So what'd you do?" He's like, "I turned around and rode the other way." And Mitch is like, "Why? She could have been the love of your life." And Curly goes, "She is," without knowing her name, without knowing anything about her. And I remember that story being really oddly affecting when I saw it as a 12-year-old. Because, like, for Curly, that was enough. Like, he said, and Mitch asked him, why didn't you, like, go talk to her? And he said, "I figured it could never get better than that. And so I get to hold this beautiful moment in my heart for the rest of my life." And I'm still not sure how I feel about that story, what that's saying. Now, if you combine it with Curly's advice that, the secret to life is one thing, and whatever your one thing is, you just make that the most important. And so for him, it wasn't love. It wasn't a relationship. It was being a cowboy, I guess. And so, like, there's something in there about, like, not expecting love to fix all of your problems. Like, you can experience it, you can enjoy it, you can like hold it in your heart, but it's it's not the end all be all. But I don't know. Like, it also seems like you avoid any actual commitment.
Yeah, it sounds like a straight up fear of intimacy to me.
Yeah.
I mean, like, unequivocal fear of intimacy is what it sounds like to me. Because she could just as easily have been a painting.
Yeah.
I mean,
he doesn't even know her name.
There's no actual relationship there.
Now, what is admirable about Curly is that he has no regrets. Like, he enjoys telling that story. He enjoys, like, but when Mitch asks him, "Have you ever been in love?" like, it hadn't been on his mind until he said it. So, like, that to me, like, I don't know. I honestly don't know how to feel about that story.
Well, he's never been in love.
Yeah. Well, because love is a verb. It's an action.
That's not in love. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's being moved by another human being's physical beauty. That's not the same as being in love.
Yeah. It's like, honestly, I'm like, headcanon is that Curly's asexual.
Yeah, I agreed.
So, in which case, like, okay, I can that contextualizes the story in a way that makes more sense to me.
Asexual and aromantic.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. But as a, like, hopeless romantic, even as a 12-year-old, there was something in that story that spoke to me, because it was like, I don't need that to have a life that I feel good about.
Well, I think the romance of it is that there's this one person, there is a one, and you don't even you just need to know they exist in order to be whole somehow.
Yeah.
You don't actually need anything. That's just the fact that they exist somehow completes you.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of the romance, but that feels toxic to me.
Yeah. Those are the things that I feel like haven't aged well. But this movie is really pretty nuanced, even with like, because we talk about gender a lot. We also talk about race. The only two characters who are not white, as far as I can tell, are the two dentists from Baltimore, Ben and Steve. And so they're introducing themselves, and I think it's Mitch says like, "Oh, you're both dentists," because they have a practice together. And Steve says, who's the younger one, he's like, "Yes, we're both dentists and black. You're making a deal of it." And his father says, "No, son, you're the one making a big deal of it." I don't know. I don't know how. That's another moment where like I don't think they'd put that in a movie they made today.
Mm.
And other than that, there's no other discussion of their race, and they like are very clearly like they have a lovely little story. Like they're the fact that they volunteer to take Cookie to get medical attention, and the like father-son dynamic is lovely. So like I feel like even with that, even though it's a very white cast, it's not bad for 91.
Yeah, I mean, I think about the way that like when they rebooted Ghostbusters, and that was just what, like 10 years ago, and like they made Leslie Jones, they still made her like, they got all these women who are PhDs, and they still made the black one the like street smart one, like so you know, making them professional healthcare professionals.
Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to afford the
yeah,
trip.
But they could,
could,
right? They could have been like Cookie could have been black, or, you know, like they, which I think under a different writer, Cookie, that is the way they would have diversified the cast.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the good stuff, like the nuanced masculinity that I think is part of what Dad loved about this movie. Because so Billy Crystal was 43 when the movie was made, maybe 42, somewhere around there. So right around the age his character was, just a little bit older. He is 5'6" and not a very prepossessing person. So like, you know, he's kind of a skinny Jewish guy with curly hair, you know. The ways that he worked to diffuse situations didn't always work. So he usually used humor, which is a very valid way of diffusing situations, and is an excellent like template for how to like stop the cowboys in their tracks. And the movie makes it clear that doesn't work for the cowboys or with Curly or later on when the cowboys are threatening Norman. It doesn't work because these men only respect whoever has the biggest stick.
Did you say stick or dick?
I said stick. Specifically, the cowboys don't stand down until Curly threatens them, or later on until Phil holds a gun on one of them.
Right.
And Curly doesn't unthaw until Mitch speaks directly to him, saying, like, if you're going to kill me, just do it. If not, shut the hell up. So I'm not sure where to put that. Now, some of it is like just the fact that he is a city slicker. Like his methods of dealing with things works in New York City. Like the rules in New York City are that if you go over, make a few jokes at your own expense, you know, say, hey, you want to come on over to our table to the woman who's being menaced, that would work. But it doesn't work in the Old West. And I'm not sure what that means. With Phil, part of what his journey is supposed to be is like he's like emotionally constipated. And so when he pulled the gun on the cowboys, he's like sitting on him with the gun to his head saying like, you're a bully and I hate bullies. You know, and it's like this emotional release because he has finally let go of his sense that he is powerless. And again, because of the way that the marriage is set up and the tropes that it relies on, it's really it's hard to feel like that being the catharsis that it's intended to be. But on the other hand, like, I really appreciate when Ed and Phil are arguing, when Ed's like, I don't want to cheat on Kim, and Phil says, so don't. It really is that simple.
Right.
And Phil's not speaking from the same place.
Right.
He was in a very unhappy marriage. But I also can see where Ed's coming from, where I was like, that's really easy for you to say, considering you couldn't. So, the positive masculinity that I see. So the three friends, they decide to continue herding the cattle because they said they would, and the cattle will die if they're left alone out there. There's not enough grazing land or water. That's about like keeping the promise you made. And so there's something very lovely in that, like, we said we were going to do this, and we're going to do this, and it's going to challenge us, and we're not sure how to do it, but we'll figure it out because we said we were going to do it. There's the, like, doing things that you're afraid of, recognizing that it's scary, but just doing it, which is not just a masculinity thing, but it is a lovely message from the film. And then the fact that Mitch realizes, like, the one thing for him is his family. It's his wife and his two kids. And by the way, the actress playing his daughter is Billy Crystal's actual daughter.
That's pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's Lindsay Crystal is her name. Like, I saw that her name was Lindsay Crystal. I was like, that can't be a coincidence, because it wasn't. That kind of masculinity also, in the, like, his family wasn't most important to him. It wasn't about, like, I am provider and, like, beat my chest because I own a woman and these are our offspring. It's like, these people are the most important in the world to me, and I'm so excited to see them after 2 weeks away. And that's a kind of positive masculinity we don't see often in media.
So, one of the things that's occurring to me in the sort of examples that you're pulling out, like, I'm trying to see what the pattern is. And one of the things that's occurring to me is about the difference with the nature of the conflict, whether the conflict is with another man, or the conflict is with oneself, or the conflict is with a task, right? And I think the conflict with the other man, it actually does work once. I mean, it's not humor, but the direct, like, standing up to Curly is still verbal, right? He doesn't need to beat Curly at fisticuffs in order to win his respect. Unlike the other two moments of conflict with other men. So I think that's worth noting, that is a pattern interrupt. And it does say something about Curly's masculinity as much as about Mitch's. But I do think that that's worth naming. And I also think sort of the conflict with nature or a task, as in this very hard thing that they don't know how to do, which is very masculine coded, which they do. And it changes them in good ways. And also the conflict with themselves. And I think that is that's the one that's actually in some ways the most nuanced. It's not the same outcome every time, right? Because each of these three men is facing conflict with himself in one way or another. And they overcome it and they don't. So I think there's something like, you're pointing to nuance around the way this film portrays masculinity, and I'm just underscoring other ways that there is still nuance, even in the the bystander de-escalation technique does not work. I'm not sure I fully agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't work the way Mitch thinks it will.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I mean, even with Bonnie, it bought them time for Curly to show up.
Yeah. Yeah. One interesting moment that I had completely forgotten. So when Mitch is in the river and like it's pretty dire, and so Phil and Ed, like, they get to where there's a log that has kind of fallen into the river, and like ahead of where Mitch is to grab him from the currents, and then Phil's the tallest, so he's reaching, and then the part of the trunk that he's on like breaks off, and so Ed has to grab him. So it's the three of them, and they finally get onto shore, and it's a lovely moment of bonding between these three lifelong friends. And the thing that really stuck with me, and I don't know, I'm curious to know if it was in the script or if this was Bruno Kirby's acting choice, but he kisses Billy Crystal on the forehead. And he's like, we were going to lose you. And that also, particularly in the early 90s, really struck me as like a very positive portrayal of like male friendship and love. Since heteronormativity is such a hell of a drug.
It's not even heteronormativity. It is straight up homophobia.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's straight up homophobia, because it's not that we're making homosexual relationships erasing them, right? Or not seeing them, or it's like what you're reacting to is the lack of homophobia in that kiss on the forehead, that physical expression of affection.
Yeah. And, particularly that it comes from the most macho of the three friends.
The same one who said, if Mitch dies, I'm going for Barbara.
No, that was actually Phil who said that.
Ew! I thought it was Ed. Ew.
Mm-mm.
Ew. Ew. Ew, Phil. Ew.
I know. Yeah, like my opinion of Phil is different now than it was when I was a kid. Because like,
I think we all owe Arlene an apology.
Yeah. So, I did want to talk a little bit about like why this appealed to Dad so much. Now, some of it had to do with the fact that it's a Western, and he loved Westerns. And so like this, adventure story. And Dad also had two lifelong friends. Now, they didn't go to Pamplona or things like that, but there was a trio there that I could see Dad seeing himself in this situation.
He totally saw himself as Billy Crystal.
And there is something, the word boomer has become so negative in the past, 10, 15 years. But there is such a baby boomer sensibility to this film that I don't think is a bad thing. It comes from, these idealistic kids in the 60s get to the early 90s and life's not what they thought it was going to be.
Right. This is not what they expected.
Yeah, and they grew up on television watching Bonanza and Rawhide and Red River. And so like, they're doing like what we do almost. They're looking to the media they consumed as children to get answers about what they're supposed to do and where they're supposed to go. And what I think is really charming and hopeful and delightful about this film is that they go to that media, like literally, like they do what they saw, the heroes doing, but they make it work for themselves rather than remaking themselves in Curly's image or John Wayne's image or TR and Jeff's image. Instead of becoming more like the crusty, hardened, like this is the only thing a man can be, they find the reality of manhood within themselves with the help of something that they have idealized their entire lives.
That's interesting. Yeah. Do you have any other points that you wanted to make sure that you make before I try and synthesize what I can?
These are more fun facts than points, but I'm gonna.
Okay, let's hear it.
So Billy Crystal had one other autobiographical moment. The conversation about best day, worst day. His best day was he was 7 years old. His father took him to Yankee Stadium for the first time he'd ever gone to a game. That was actually Billy Crystal's experience. He's a lifelong Yankees fan. He actually wears New York Mets gear in the film because the Mets had donated quite a bit of money to his, I can't remember what the charity was called. There was a comedy charity that they would put on every year.
Yeah. I can't think of what it was called either.
Yeah.
The Red Nose. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So he wore Mets gear, but he still said Yankees in that scene. It is so heartening to me as someone who writes to learn how much of themselves other like really prolific and excellent creators put into their art.
Yeah. The
other thing I learned was that Billy Crystal liked his horse so much that he rode that he bought it and kept it. And I think the horse was called Beechnut.
Neat.
They had like 8 different calves to
play Norman.
To play Norman. And it was some sort of puppet that it was not a real cow giving birth, obviously. But they were calves that were like that newborn. Like it wasn't like when you see a baby on screen, it's supposed to be a newborn. It's a 3-month-old.
Yeah.
I mean, it was sure not like seconds old, but still. So that was pretty cool. And then I learned that Bruno Kirby is severely allergic to horses, and he had to get like a shot before filming every day.
Wow.
And that's why he didn't come back for the sequel, was because he's like, I can't do the horses again.
Wow. Huh. Neat.
So just fun facts that I found that I thought like add to the charm of the movie. Like we can be hard on media. This is really worth revisiting and just recognizing like what it gets right, even as we work to make better pulp culture moving forward.
Yeah. All right, let me see if I can lift up some highlights. So this movie does pass the Bechdel test, meaning there are at least 2 named female characters who talk to one another about something other than a man. And that is when Barbara and Kim talk about Kim's lingerie modeling. So it passes in letter. So I think the big thing that I heard from you in your analysis of this, is the really delightfully nuanced view of masculinity that the film offers, so that it paints sort of toxic traditional masculinity in very unflattering light in the people, in the persons of TR and Jeff, who are the 2 cowboys who are really just awful and really reprehensible in multiple ways. And it gives us other views of masculinity and with these 3 protagonists, and not just them, but especially these 3 protagonists who find ways to integrate the behaviors that are very masculine coded, specifically herding cattle and riding horses and rope tricks in this case, into their existing personalities, which are not cowboys, that are not that sort of reprehensible toxic masculinity, that are not particularly like physically confrontational. Mm-hmm. It showed us actually in the person of Mitch, it gave us a model of an effective bystander intervention. It actually wasn't that effective, though we saw it several times. And I think you were suggesting that asking the question of the film, like, what are you trying to tell us here, filmmakers, that this actually, legitimate strategy for bystander intervention never works for Mitch. And I think that I think where you were landing, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that like context matters. And so if that perhaps that strategy was effective in New York City, but it's not effective in the Old West, where again, masculinity is constructed differently. I think that's part of where you were going. I think that's a legitimate read. I also wonder if we think about sort of maybe the filmmakers were pushing us to think about the ways to actually address conflict more directly, not necessarily physically, because the one time that Mitch is able, in a conflict with another human, with a man, time that Mitch is able actually to diffuse it is when he directly addresses it, not physically. He doesn't come to fisticuffs with Curly, but he does directly address him verbally, and that's how he diffuses that conflict.
I will say,
Please.
and didn't mention it, but like what you were saying about how his intervention buys them time when the cowboys are bothering Bonnie, harassing. Thank you. That's the word I'm looking for. I also, he is like the breaking the seal kind of bystander. So where like he's the one who goes and like uses humor to try to deflect, and then other people come to support him.
Yeah.
And we need that person, even if they're not able to completely diffuse the situation. It is so helpful to have the first person who shows
the vanguard.
Up. Yeah.
That then gives permission to others to also step forward and intervene.
Yeah. And so that's something that I think is worth noting. Because that, with the exception of when it's just him and Curly, which kind of also underlines like that he couldn't be the vanguard because it was just him and Curly. But when there were other people, he started with humor.
Yeah. So I think that's a really like interesting piece, that whether we put it with gender or not, thinking about what it means to have an effective bystander intervention and like what are the components of that. And the fact that this movie gave us some of that is really, really interesting. That I was not anticipating when we sat down to talk about this. One key takeaway for me is like Phil is not the sort of lovable, henpecked husband that I remember. That he's a lot more toxic than I remember. That I think in the 90s we kind of overlooked it because it was normal. I'm putting quotes around that because normal is as normal does, but it was normal. It was like what we were seeing. It was not only was it a trope, it was also like that kind of behavior out of a man and wasn't acceptable. Was something we were expected to accept in our protagonists and just in life. So I think that's an interesting thing for me. Like I'm definitely feeling like I owe Arlene an apology retroactively for the way that I thought about her in the 90s. Another piece of the masculinity that I didn't name but relates to our father is the fact that we see Mitch, we're not, as viewers, we don't question his manhood, right? Like we don't think less of him because he's a nurturer. And because his family is his one thing, we actually think more of him. And I think that's something really worth like lifting up, and also reminds us of our dad, who you pointed out was very much a nurturer, like waved at babies. Like I've never seen him more Papa Bear than when my kid was born, and like somebody dared smoke like within 100 yards of her.
Oh my goodness. I didn't know that, but I can imagine. Oh my gosh.
So what did I forget? What did I miss in my highlights tour that you want to make sure that you lift up?
Along with the normality of Arlene, just like we accept that she's awful. We accept the normality of Bonnie being like a prize.
A prize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rather than a person in her own right. Even though I will say the movie does give her a little bit more agency than prizes often did had in the 90s. So like the conversation where she's like, I like baseball, fine, I just don't want to talk about it all the time. And actually one of the things Phil says when she says that, she's like, I like baseball, but I talk about real things. And then Ed is a obnoxious asshole. But Phil then says, you know, I get what you're saying, but when I was 18 and my dad and I couldn't talk about anything, we could talk about baseball. And so like there is something, I feel like that moment spoke to our dad too in a way. I don't know. Like, and it's not like he was a huge baseball fan. But there are things like that, I think, with 20th century American men, where like the people that they love can't talk about the things that matter because they've been taught that they're not allowed to. And so they make sure that baseball statistics matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was a lovely moment.
Yeah. The other thing I forgot is race in this film. So we do have Ben and
Steve,
thank you. The father-son dentists from Baltimore who are Black. And we talked briefly about the fact that sort of Steve, the younger dentist, has a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. Like he's expecting racism. And his dad kind of de-escalates a bit. And also the fact that in the movie, like other movies of the time, like one might have expected if they wanted to quote unquote, diversify the cast, they would have done so with someone who was a different socioeconomic status. So by making these two men dentists and actually other tourists, there was, to a certain, in my mind, that is a step up from what it could have been, which would have been like it was Cookie or God forbid one or both of the cowboys.
Yeah, I think that was intentional though, that they made sure that both cowboys were white.
Well, thank God.
Yeah.
For reals, thank God that they did that, because I think, you know, without thinking about it, I can imagine a white filmmaker doing that and really contributing to some of the worst kind of racial stereotypes. Because the harassment of Bonnie was essential.
Yes,
to the story.
Yeah. The other thing that Ben and Steve offer is a really positive portrayal of a father-son relationship, adult father-son relationship.
Which we don't have from any of the three protagonists.
Yeah.
Right.
Because like we know that Mitch's dad is alive because he's on the call when his mom calls to wish him a happy birthday. But like other than the story about seeing the baseball game at age 7, we don't really know much about his dad. And then, we know that Ed has a terrible relationship with his father because he hasn't seen him since he was 14. And Phil says his father was proud of him on the day of his wedding, which is part of the reason why it was the best day of his life.
Right.
So, but like getting to see that on screen where there's this lovely relationship, these two men who clearly care deeply about each other to the point where they share a dental practice. That's amazing.
And they want to spend more time together.
And they want to spend more time together. Yeah. They choose to go on vacation together. And when Ben is like, we'll have fun on this adventure, taking Cookie to get medical attention. Like, it's kind of the lesson that Mitch learns, which is like being grateful for what you have. So like, I get to have time with my son. It's not what we planned. It's not exactly what we want, but we can still make it fun. Yeah. And we're in the best place to do this because we have the most medical training of anyone here.
Right. Yeah. So in the end, I want to reiterate what my sister said. We're hard on media sometimes, but it sounds like this one is worth the rewatch. Though I don't think they could make it again because cell phones.
Yeah.
Or sad phones, I guess. I don't know. Anyway.
Well, it's funny because there's the Ira and Barry have a cell phone, and like it's hard to remember, but I know that was the butt of the joke at one point. Like, can you believe these people are bringing? What is this cell phone thing? And I was just like, now it's so normal. I'm just like, oh yeah, that's supposed to be funny.
Right. Right.
But it gets destroyed in the stampede, so which is why they don't use it.
Okay. Well, next week, I am going to bring you my deep thoughts about Blade Runner.
Oh, it's another movie I associate with Dad.
Me too, completely. In fact, we'll talk about this next week, but the reason that it's on the list and that I want to talk about it is because in my mind, it is like the quintessential science fiction movie.
Yeah.
According to our dad.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if he would actually agree with that now. Like, if we could resurrect him and talk to him, like, if he would say, like, but in my mind, that's the perfect science fiction movie, according to him. So that's why it's on the list. So that's what we're gonna. I think that maybe even why I thought of it after we put City Slickers on the list. Yeah. I was like, oh yeah, Dad, let's dig in. So Blade Runner.
Sounds good.
See you then.
I'll see you then.
Do you like stickers? Sure, we all do. If you head over to guygirlsmedia.com/sign up and share your address with us, we'll send you a sticker. It really is that easy. But don't wait, there's a limited quantity. Thanks for listening. Our theme music is Professor Umlaut by Kevin MacLeod from Incompetech.com. Find full music credits in the show notes. Until next time, remember, pop culture is still culture. And shouldn't you know what's in your head?